This is a live look at Force 13 HQ. Good evening or good morning, depending on what time it is at your place. It's just ticked over to midnight here at Force 13 HQ, and we're entering July the 9th here. It's already well into the day in Japan and in Taiwan and China, where Typhoon Maria is on the way. We're also, of course, looking at the Atlantic because there are still technically two systems. The Remnants of Beryl still have a tropical storm watch for, I think it was Martinique or one of those islands there. We'll look into that shortly. And Tropical Storm Chris, which is also at tropical storm intensity. Okay, hopefully this button does the right thing. Let's see if we can introduce the Discord team right now, which consists of Hank, David, and Nelson, if I'm not mistaken.
Good to be here.
Good evening. They're over there somewhere as well. Oh, there they are. Well, there they are in print at least. But in the meantime, well, there you can see on your screen everything that is going on right now. Oh, and there I am as well again. The last thing you want to see. If you want to contact us whilst we're on the air, do send your messages in. Start your message with Force 13, all in text. And I don't know where everyone wants to pick up on. Where you'd like to begin? Maria, a Category 5 for the second time? I suppose that's where it has to start.
Yeah, that's probably a good place.
So what are your thoughts on Maria so far, Hank? You've been saying since its very inception that it was going to do something like this.
I want to toot my own horn, but yeah, it's been doing a pretty big. It's been a pretty big system, pretty strong system rather. Now Category 5, second year in a row. I mean, it's just a very impressive looking storm. If I could get the screen share up, that'd be great. Okay, so here's a current Dvorak loop of the storm. If you don't really know how to read this, that's fine. Basically, what this is saying is that the more gray these cloud tops are in here, basically that means the colder the cloud tops, the more intense the storm, and it's a very well-defined storm. More of a visible loop for you here from RAM. You can see a beautiful presentation on satellite. There's not really much to say. It's just a beautiful-looking storm right now. And then as this progresses towards the west-northwest, obviously it's going to pose a threat for bringing significant impacts to portions of East Asia, including northern Taiwan, East China, and the southwesternmost Japanese islands, including the Ryukyu Islands. So,
the maximum eye temperature indicated from satellite is 19 degrees Celsius. It's probably warmer than that if they actually had recon planes in there, but it's pretty warm as they go from satellite depictions.
Yeah, it's it's very impressive, and the 140 knots, that might even be a bit of an underestimation. I think it could be closer to like 145 or 150 even. Maybe not 150, but 145 I'd say is a pretty solid number for the storm. The Dvorak numbers are above T7.0 at last check, which means that it is a solid Category 5 storm. And I'm sure this topic has been discussed in past live events, though I have not really been paying attention to them. The name has been kind of an issue with the storm because people are just like, okay, what's up with the name? Like, Maria was such a devastating storm in the Atlantic last year. Why is it not being used in the Western Pacific? Well, it's just a stroke of, because let me rephrase that. So it's been on the Western Pacific naming list for, since the current convention began. This is the fourth inception of the storm name in the basin. And I mean, yes, Maria in the Atlantic last year was a terrible storm, but it was only retired in the Atlantic basin, not worldwide. So as a result, Maria is being used once more in the Pacific, and it just so happened coincidentally to also be a Category 5, and interestingly enough, also rapidly intensify at pretty much the same rate Maria did leading up to Dominica.
If the West Pacific got a bit more of a shuffle on last year, we could have seen Maria earlier as well.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. But so far, the most intense storms worldwide: 2017 Maria,
Number one.
2018 Maria. So, you know, maybe another typhoon come along and dethrone it, but that's a topic for another time. So, I guess if land impacts are really what's going to be the big story for the storm over the next 3 days. I have the National Hurricane Center, excuse me, the JTWC forecast. Yeah, we wish. Showing that the storm with 100-knot winds, so Category 3 storm, should be located north of Taipei by the 10th, late on the 10th. So that would be by Tuesday, and approaching the east coast of China, and probably make landfall there as either a Category 2, maybe Category 3 typhoon, and would probably be a bigger system because you can see right here.
What do you think about that forecast?
What do you mean? Like, the accuracy, or like?
Yeah, do you agree with it? What I'm getting at is we're seeing it right now, and it's apparently got low amounts of wind shear ahead of it, but neither of the agencies are predicting any more strengthening. Why is that?
I think there's something that has to do with the cold sea surface temperatures ahead of it, because...
Well, they're not. They're around 28 degrees.
There's a patch right here, just to the east of Taiwan, where it's close to 27, 26. That, I believe that's the cold water trail for Praparoon, however you pronounce that. That passed through this area about a week ago, I believe. Yeah. So there is some cooler sea surface temperatures there. Let me see if I could also pull up.
Piping hot next to the Philippines, by the way. There's a lot of Philippine interest in this storm. It's not going to really get close to Manila at all. It has just, ironically, ticked under the 1,000-mile mark for Manila, but it's not going to get near the Philippines.
Yeah, and then also what could be part of it is there is some mid-tropospheric dry air that the storm is going to have to pass through. I mean, we can already see some effect of that because the western side of the storm isn't as healthy as the eastern and southern quadrants.
That's been a feature for some time.
Yeah, so that might be something that we need to pay attention to, because the dry air in here is certainly prevalent, so that might end up kind of easing the storm's intensity. That, and as it gets into this area, generally there's more, the storm kind of has to grow because, we have more available heat fluxes, so the storm's going to have to grow in size. So that's going to probably keep the pressure kind of steady, but it'll probably end up dropping the wind speeds, as the presentation probably is going to end up deteriorating over time. And apart from that, there isn't very much shear in this area, so I wouldn't assume that would be a big problem.
Yeah, there's still no typhoon-related warnings out yet in Japan, on the islands, or in Taiwan. I heard that China had issued a blue typhoon warning, but I haven't seen any confirmation of that on their website.
That's interesting. I would have imagined that there would be at least watches up by this time. For at least the Japanese islands.
All we have at the minute are high wave advisories on those southern islands. I'm guessing it's the equivalent to something like a rip current statement or something.
Probably.
Which is in effect in North Carolina as well, as we look at Chris in our top right hand panel there. The visible imagery today, I suppose we'll talk about Chris for a moment here, Hank. What are your thoughts on how it's generated, how it's looking, what it's going to do next? Because this is a bigger threat than what's left of Beryl now.
Yeah, so Chris is an interesting storm. It's really kind of it's stuck in a very difficult spot right now. So I have a infrared loop of the storm up right now. In fact, it's probably better if I get a visible loop, which, there we go, right there. So the storm is kind of stuck in a very interesting spot right now. If this loop would play, that'd be good. It's kind of stuck in this area of somewhat. It's not really hostile, but it's not really favorable either. So I'm just going to stop this loop. So right now the storm is it's beginning to ramp up because it's been over this area for a good part of 2 days now. And you would think that, because it's over this area for such a long time, sea surface temperatures would start to cool due to upwelling. It's not really the case, because because it's situated right over the Gulf Stream, and all this water is being forced up
Yeah.
towards the northeast. So all the cooler water generated from Chris is all up to the northeast. In addition, it's kind of stuck right here. There's this cold front located right here, and Chris is kind of stuck in this area right here. So you have all this dry air up here in to the north of the front that's kind of trying to be entrained into the storm like this. So that, and it's still dealing with some easterly shear, which is causing actually the vortexes with height, or it's being tilted. And what that does is, this tropical storm needs a vertical column of air, of rising air, to actually get going. And Chris is currently suffering from its vortexes being tilted slightly to the east with height, so it's not really able to intensify as quickly. But as this front continues to decay and Chris kind of meanders in this area, it should begin to ramp up, likely to hurricane strength, according to the National Hurricane Center. Currently expecting, I think, 85 miles an hour is the peak. Can you confirm that for me, Nathan?
Oh, I'm
85
not
miles an hour.
sure. It wouldn't surprise me. But it's going to be a very interesting situation to watch this, because it's riding a fine line, as storms do when they go up the eastern seaboard, with that Gulf Stream. And if it slips out of those warm waters, that'll be a premature end. Some models are suggesting that it's going to move towards maybe even west of, well, it was saying that last night, west of Nova Scotia, or a landfall on Nova Scotia, and that would mean it slips out of that Gulf Stream.
Yeah, it's kind of it really does depend on whether or not it can stay over the Gulf Stream. To be completely frank with you, um, there's I think some of those models yesterday were pulling it up towards Nova Scotia, because there's this. In fact, if I zoom out a little
They've
bit,
moved back a little bit now. You've sort of
yeah.
got two
So
camps at the minute. You've got the CTCX and the HMON, which bring it into Nova Scotia, and then the others taking it to Newfoundland still.
yeah, so I'm assuming something kind of like that.
Yeah.
And what I guess that difference has to do with is either the strength of this upper trough, or this one over Manitoba that's supposed to dip down and could try to cut off. If Chris stays down here a little bit longer, then it might be able to kind of be influenced a bit by this trough and kind of take a track more like that, rather than just straight towards the northeast like that. But either way, impacts to the United States should be limited. But if it does kind of take a track like this, then maybe in areas like Cape Cod, might need to pay attention to more potentially squally weather. But that's still kind of unlikely and to cause huge impacts. But I will say that the biggest impact from Chris in the United States will by far be rough seas. We've already had a confirmed fatality in North Carolina from someone who is drowned in rip currents as a result of Chris. So we do not want any more of those happening as a result of the storm, for, well, obvious reasons. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. And by the time it reaches, maritime Canada, it will likely be a hurricane somewhere in here. But by the time it gets there, it'll probably weaken substantially, because it will no longer be over the Gulf Stream. It will be over much cooler waters, and it will also be getting its extratropical transition at that time. So we're not really expecting a hurricane impact up in Canada, but we're expecting at least something up in that area.
Well, there's very little left of Beryl right now, but it is just about moving over, or very close to the island. In fact, it's just north of there. It's which island is that now? It's failing me. Is that one Dominica, or is Dominica? Which one's just north of Martinique?
Dominica.
That is Dominica. So it is the convection of what's left of Beryl is pretty much over there now. Ironically, only Martinique is left with a tropical storm watch. They must be very cautious in case it becomes a tropical storm again. It doesn't look like it. The National Hurricane Center giving it a 30% chance of regeneration. Your thoughts on Beryl from start to finish, since you've not been here to talk about it until now?
Oh boy, Beryl has been an interesting storm. I think the fact that it got to hurricane status in the main development region when it's supposed to be this hostile. Honestly, I don't think that really says too much about the rest of the season, because it was at a very low latitude. It was my God, it's so small.
Well, we were saying the same things about Brett last year.
Yeah, I don't really think that it means too much because of those two factors. But seeing how it just kind of jumped up towards the northwest into the actual main development region, it just died like that, I guess that might say something. But again, it is July, and these trades are really screaming.
Huge amount of dry air out in the central Atlantic.
Yeah, just the Sal is much more enhanced this year than normal.
So you do still think that the Atlantic will be, killed off effectively or massively suppressed? You may get significant amounts of numbers, but very little ace, for instance.
Yeah, that maybe I did release a forecast that said 9, 4, and 1, but that was the day before Beryl formed, so that's pretty much invalidated now. So I would say something maybe like 11 named storms would be feasible.
Sort of like a 2015 there.
Yeah, something similar to 2015's numbers wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if Chris becomes a hurricane, then I might have to up that even more, which is probably going to end up happening.
Oh, no.
But anyways, Beryl right now looks like a mess, obviously. It's not even a tropical cyclone anymore. It's just, no pun intended, it's really barreling through these areas. And all these, and I mean, really, impacts for the Western Antilles really just extend from Dominica northward, because really in Martinique, I don't even know why they still have tropical storm warnings up, because,
that is, sorry.
Excuse me. Because really, they're not expecting, gale force winds, but to the north of the trough now, I guess. Yeah, you're probably going to see gale force winds because these trades are just so strong. And that applies mostly for Dominican Guadeloupe as Beryl moves through. And then eventually, as it gets in the Eastern Caribbean, may give some rain to Puerto Rico and, the Dominican Republic. Then eventually may reform in the Southwest. But that really just depends on whether or not it can find itself in a favorable environment or not, which it might happen, but it might not at the same time. It's still kind of not really far out, but it's still kind of uncertain at this time. It kind of depends also on what Chris is going to do and how long it lingers where it's lingering right now. So.
Yeah, that is very true. Do you believe that the longer... What was I saying last night? I think it was the longer Chris stalls, the less intense it's likely to be. Is that true?
Well, I think it kind of depends. Really, it depends on how long it is able to just. Really, it depends on how long that the shear in this kind of this frontal dry air kind of persists. Because, yeah, it's going to be over, the Gulf Stream, but that water is always moving. It's moving really fast towards the northeast because, the flow of the current. So, as a result, it's probably not going to suffer too much from upwelling, but if it does stay there for longer than the forecast period states, then it is possible it might, just not be as strong as initially forecast, but at the same time, if it does linger around for that longer, it might have a better shot of actually causing some more impacts in the United States in terms of actual, squally weather and, rainfall, and what you normally expect with a tropical cyclone. Nothing significant, but, the outer fringes more than likely because of that trough that I mentioned earlier dipping down. But I think the intensity is mostly dependent on whether or not it stays over the Gulf Stream, as you said.
Now, I'm just looking at one of these, from RAM, the recent, I think it's 18 Zulu, with the models. And, well, they've really tightened up, actually, with most of the models now calling for Nova Scotia landfall.
That wouldn't surprise me. Let me just look at that really quick.
And generally, we're looking at hurricane strength. 2 of the models say Category 2.
I'm seeing that. What I'm seeing here is most of the models are saying Newfoundland.
Interesting.
What I'm seeing is that the HMON is showing a Nova Scotia landfall, and then the UK Met is actually showing closer to Maine.
Oh, God.
So I doubt that will happen, but, it's the outlier. You can see that here. So, yeah, and then you can see a lot of 24s and 48s bundled up down here. That shows that's going to stay in that same general area for probably another 2 days, and then move out by probably Tuesday night, Wednesday, and then probably won't impact Canada until Thursday night, Friday time frame. Is generally when the models are anticipating that. So Chris is probably going to be around probably for the rest of the week, and then will become extratropical probably by Friday, if I assume.
Interesting. I'm just trying to get a large version of your screen to come and appear on the stream here. Oh well, we'll do that shortly. If you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air, do send your messages in. Chris is looking good, says one person there. Chris might hit Newfoundland as an extra tropical storm. That is also possible. Again, you're just looking briefly at Beryl there. And Hank, if you wanted to bring that map up just again briefly there, so that we could see it in large form. There it is again, and the UK Met out there, way out west. That is an outlier if I ever saw one.
Yeah, don't pay attention. If you're living in Maine, I mean, yeah, watch it, but don't think it's going to impact you. And anywhere in New England, for that matter, don't think it's going to impact you, but at least watch it.
Yeah, so there we are. David, Nelson, any thoughts on anything that you've heard so far?
I just would ask Hank about the stalling. Will it not help intensification that it should remain in warmer waters if it stays stalled?
Well, I mean, again, it just kind of depends on it. So while it's over the Gulf Stream, it's obviously going to be getting a lot of heat like underneath the storm. That's going to help fuel the convection. But at the same time, if it kind of lingers over the same area, and even if it drifts south a little bit, then it might actually be able to. If it drifts farther south, it'll probably be able to strengthen a bit more. But if it stays in that general area and just kind of just sits and doesn't move at all, period, then eventually it's going to start to feel that, and it's going to eventually start to weaken because once you have the storm sit over waters and it starts to upwell, then all that's going to shift off to the northeast. But if it's still there, then the upwelling is just going to increase, exponentially, and it's going to be eventually underneath the storm to the point where it's going to eventually start to weaken. So it doesn't happen as fast as, say, if it was stalling over the Gulf. Because if it was stalling over the Gulf, it'd probably already be suffering from upwelling. But because it's over the Gulf Stream, then it's probably not going to be as big of an issue for the storm. And I mean, sea surface temperatures are 29 degrees right now off the coast of North Carolina, so that's plenty. I mean, it's also extremely above normal, but that's another topic. Open Atlantic, meaning tropical Atlantic, yeah, it's still below normal, but there has been a recent, trend upwards in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies, mostly because the trades have been kind of slacking a little bit, especially towards the coast of Africa. In fact, let me see if I can pull up. Yeah, the EPAC is cooling down. This graphic that I have on screen.
I'm sorry, no one heard me the last two things I said. I just said the East Pacific struggling there as well.
Yeah. So this graphic I have shows a 7-day change, and it's showing, the EPAC is cooling off quite a bit, especially, further off towards Mexico, kind of near the area where Fabio just tracked, in between that and Hawaii. And you can also see in the tropical Atlantic, it's warming up, and, in the Caribbean, Western Gulf, it's warming up.
Interesting.
Subtropical Atlantic is actually cooling off a little bit, which is kind of balancing out that, kind of unfavorable AMO pattern, which was in place during June. That might signal, higher activity for the Atlantic, but, the fact that we're having this much activity in July normally means that we're probably going to see some sort of suppression of activity for the rest of the month, and maybe even lasting into August, just because of the way that the MJO comes around. So this, I believe, we're in a positive phase right now, so it's probably going to die off in the next week after Chris goes away, but that's normal. So, and then the EPAC might light up again, though I haven't seen the models recently for the Eastern Pacific.
Yeah, well, it was fun last month.
Yeah. For one, I don't really care about the Eastern Pacific, and for another, I guess it's just the fact that, because Fabio's gone, it's just nothing else on the National Hurricane Center site for the Eastern Pacific, just Atlantic right now, which I thought would not really happen in July, but that's besides the point.
I was just trying to get some imagery up here, but something's broken again. David, have you got anything for us?
Not at this point in time. Just gathering some information that I can bring up via screen share.
We're just looking at the latest visible imagery close-up here of Chris. Just waiting for all of those images to load in the sequence here. Expanding in its convection by the looks of things this evening.
Yeah, it is. Mostly because the shear is kind of slackening a bit, and the dry air is kind of being filtered out. What's going on with my screen share? So it's starting to It's kind of starting to enhance itself a little bit. That and it's kind of also being subdued into somewhat of a baroclinic environment because you have this upper low towards its northeast that is kind of inducing some sort of baroclinic interaction over into the storm that's allowing convection to kind of spread out a little bit more as opposed to being just kind of confined and sheared. So that's something that's benefiting the storm right now, which will probably help it eventually get to hurricane strength as it just kind of meanders here.
Okay then, let's go back and have another look at Maria then. Here is some of the latest imagery from the Super Typhoon, which is still Category 5 at this point. We're looking at the latest rapid imagery from the Himawari 8 satellite as it's been trekking towards sort of the northwest, maybe a little bit more west-northwest than that, actually, as you'd probably expect. When we were first looking at the models, they were saying that Japan would have real issues with this, and they've been trending south, and for the last 24 to 48 hours they've really been going for Taiwan and China and the southernmost islands of the Ryukyu island chain. As far as we know, still no formal warnings related to the typhoon have been issued yet. We do expect that will happen pretty darn soon because it's not terribly far from land now. And I'm just going to take another look at the model chart on that too, just to give an idea of how far away it actually is. I believe this is up to date. Maybe it isn't actually. How interesting. It's supposed to be. But this is what the models were saying earlier on today. And we're looking at landfall. Well, we're looking at it moving through those Japanese islands maybe in about 24 hours. Maybe a little bit more.
Nathan, JMA has no advisories for the Maria and the same for the Taiwan Central Weather Bureau.
Yes, I know that for sure. We have been wondering about China, but as far as I can tell, there are no typhoon warnings there yet. There is a blue rain warning, which is in effect for quite a few locations by the looks of it. Obviously, there is significant rain expected in the area, and I'm sure they will be doing, they will be preparing the public over there as well. Just get another look of the track forecast from JMA. That's what they're saying right now. That's the latest as of 9 PM UTC. So around 36 hours. Nope.
Nathan, I'll got the JMA on the screen share.
About 36 hours until the Japanese Meteorological Agency think it will move through the southernmost Ryukyu Islands. They take it really close to the northern tip of Taiwan and then into China. And what's David showing us there?
The current track chart and the Joint Typhoon Warning Center.
Yep, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center's forecast chart there as well. And they're actually they're saying the same. About 36 hours until the closest pass for Miyakojima and Ishigaki-jima. And then at the 48-hour mark, you're looking at its closest pass to Taipei. And then after that, it continues to move west-northwest to an eventual landfall point somewhere in between Fuzhou and Wenzhou in China.
And Nathan, since our last broadcast, just reading through the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre's advisory, read the eye, it's 20 nautical miles. It was 30, but
Yeah,
it's
shrunk.
more defined at 20 nautical miles.
Hank, anything to look for, given that information that the eye has shrunk about 10 miles in 12 hours?
Has it really? Wow. I didn't know that. Well, I mean, it's usually a sign of intensification, but I mean, right now it's not really intensifying according to the JWC. At the same time, though, cloud tops have kind of been oscillating between,
Yes.
not, kind of white Dvorak to CMG Dvorak to white Dvorak CMG. Like, it's been pretty back and forth. So right now, JWC is actually kind of weakening Maria. Or not, excuse me. ATCF is showing that Maria is actually kind of going down a little bit in intensity, which is kind of surprising to me.
That's the real time, though, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
It is an interesting tool to look at. It is experimental, however, and the proper ATCF can disregard it. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that'll be the case as we get into the next advisory. I think they'll keep it the same, don't you?
I mean, I'd put it at 145, but if they're doing that, then yeah, probably 140.
140 knots.
Yeah, got 140 and 915 central pressure.
Which was what
And
was
like
predicted by the
Yep.
JMA yesterday.
Yep.
Now you're on the
And-
Central Weather Bureau's website,
Yes, I am.
and you can see what they're
And I have
predicting as well. There are several agencies, some more well known than others. And I think the Philippines might have been doing updates on this as well, but I think it's just slipped out of their area, hasn't it?
Well, have a
I
look.
think so.
Yeah, I think so. I also see that you've got Canada up there on your tabs as well, Dave. Are there any warnings in Canada right now?
They have severe thunderstorm warnings. Sorry, there's the radar.
Yes,
Not much, but
not related
this
to
is the
Chris.
one. There we go. No, nothing. Only local thunderstorms
Well,
and heat advisories.
There's a statement out in Nova Scotia. I wonder whether that might be storm related.
It might be. I don't know.
The grey area. No, David.
What?
The grey area.
The gray area along the coast of Nova Scotia.
Like I said yesterday in the live stream, it's my geography.
No, David.
Okay,
How about your colour coding, perhaps?
there we are.
Yes, there's a lot of grey there. What are they saying? It is about the tropical cyclone, yes.
Oh, hello,
So
yes.
I wonder what they're
right.
saying. It's probably just a general message saying, let's see. Yeah, that's just approaching Nova Scotia by Thursday, likely weakening slightly as it does so. A good deal of uncertainty, and that is, for those, if anyone's watching in Atlantic Canada, that is the main thing to take home with you, is that it is an uncertain situation and it could end up, missing, or it could go further west than expected. And those in Newfoundland, currently expecting the worst effects from Chris, may not see them because it hits Nova Scotia instead. Models flip-flapping a little bit.
Nathan, it's interesting, tonight that in that advisory that I've got on the screen, it's expected to remain somewhat stationary and become better organised.
Yes, well, that's what the National Hurricane Centre are saying as well. Pretty much in agreement. I'm sure they communicate. The Canadian Hurricane Centre there as well. They've been closely monitoring it, as they say. But
Yep.
yes, no particular news from them that we don't already have from the National Hurricane Centre. Just in case you haven't seen the latest cone, that is what it looks like from the NHC for Chris. It expects stalling, and actually it does expect that the National Hurricane Center do expect that Chris will become a hurricane before it fully leaves that stalling motion.
And Nathan, I'd just like to add from the Canadian Weather Center, issued by the Canadian government, we've talked about Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. Obviously, that includes New Brunswick and the Prince Edward Island areas. Need to be on the lookout for Chris as well.
Yes, indeed. I saw, in fact, just in case anyone is wondering about the percentage chances of storm conditions, there are a lot of places involved. Only a few of them made it onto our screen every time they circle around the carousel on our left-hand side. I'll read out a few of them here. Let's see. Eddy Point, Nova Scotia, 24% chance of tropical storm conditions in the next 5 days. Sydney, Nova Scotia, 30%. Sable Island, 38%. Halifax, 24%. Yarmouth, 26%. Moncton, 15%. St John, New Brunswick, 15%. Eastport, Maine, 14%. As well. A few other places there too. Augusta, Maine, 6%. Portland, 6%. Concord, New Hampshire, 4%. Portsmouth, 6%. Worcester, Massachusetts, 5%. Springfield, 4%. Boston, 7% chance of tropical storm force winds. Fairly low percentages, but that may be the highest they've seen for quite a while. Hyannis, 19%. Nantucket, 22% there. That's the highest percent chance in the US, if I'm not mistaken, in the northeast at least. Then we go down to Montauk Point, 14%. Ocean City, Maryland, 13%. Elizabeth City, 11%. Cape Hatteras is the highest percent chance anywhere, and that's at 39% chance. So significant chance of that, and 6% chance of hurricane conditions there as well. Don't think so though.
Well, the National Hurricane Center in its advisory has issued that the southeast portion of Chris will be the one that gains its wind field in terms of distance from the center.
Yeah, interesting. David, you're also showing us that in an illustrative form there.
Yes, that's for Tropical Storm Chris.
So that's pretty much everything you need to know there, and very little that you need to know about Beryl at the minute.
Nathan, severe weather bulletin that's been issued by Pegasa, issued at 5 a.m. local time.
In reference to what?
Maria.
It's not going anywhere near the Philippines, however.
Gardo, G-A-R-D-O, they've given it another name,
yes.
May enhance the southwest monsoon.
Now that is something notable, yes, because typhoons and storms do have that effect sometimes too. The monsoon enhanced in the Philippines, and those events on their own, even if the typhoon doesn't hit, can cause significant flooding problems in the Philippines. But I just want to bring up, as we're going back to talking about Maria again here, this is another wind probability chart for tropical storm force winds, this time for Maria, and you can see quite clearly which areas are in for it according to these wind speed probabilities over the next 5 days. You can see that the Philippine Islands are completely out of that zone of 5% or higher. The very northern Batanes Islands of the Philippines may be 3 or 4%. The islands further south, the Calayan and Babayan group of islands, probably 1% at most. The mainland of Luzon, I would say, has a negligible, if nothing, chance of seeing anything from Maria. But you look towards the northern tip of Taiwan, they're just about getting to 80% chance, and the coast of China as well, similarly. 80% chance just south of Wenzhou. And even in Shanghai up there as well, around a 12% chance of tropical storm conditions. So we're certainly getting towards the business end of this storm, and it's going to be quite a long few days for those in the path of the storm, and it still promises to be very significant by the time it gets there, with wind shear on the decrease. It gets somewhat difficult to see what will stop Maria from being a very strong typhoon by the time it gets there. Just want to see if I can bring now some visible imagery from the Himawari satellite. Well, we'll go to David just for a minute whilst I go and get that ready. David's showing us some floater views here as well.
On Super Typhoon Maria, and as mentioned, 20 nautical miles down from 30, but I had a look at the imagery when I did the update last night, and I had to put it on the stop the rotation, and it's really maintaining its eye feature.
Looking good on the
sea surface temperature. Yep, sea surface temperature. They said I was around 29. Even to its west.
Hank did show earlier, that cold water trail that could be the little buffer for this storm. There's a nice little handy graphic there as well. You can see it drops to about 27, 28 there, just ahead of it.
Yep.
It could make all the difference.
So the next day or two advisories, let's see how much of the picture changes. The Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, when's their next update?
They'll be coming up in about 2 hours' time, or maybe a little bit less, depending on how quick they are. There's a visible image of Maria right now, quite clearly got the look about it on the visible imagery. That's what a Category 5 looks like.
We weren't expecting Maria to regain Cat 5 status, were we?
Well, I'm not sure about that. We had an inkling that may well have happened. There was nothing, in my mind, stopping it.
Nelson, your thoughts on Maria?
She's certainly impressive in her presentation on the satellite imagery, and that is especially worrying. I'm not entirely sure that it's going to weaken as it has been forecasted to. I don't see anything with the sea surface temperatures or the shear that convince me of that.
Now, the location of Maria, the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, sorry, I'll have to take this apology.
Well, David's busy with his phone. He's a busy guy. And let me just see if we can get the latest temperature of the eye inside Maria right now. I'm just having a little look. It's about 19 degrees Celsius. It's been fairly constant about that, to be fair, or for the last 12 hours or so. It's a shame that we don't have reconnaissance planes, though, isn't it? Because usually they can tell us the exact temperature of the eye, and usually it is quite a bit warmer than what the satellites say. And what have you thought of Maria's eye today, David?
Well, just wondering for a comparison for the rest pack, how far back can we go?
Well, not particularly far, to be honest. I mean, these things do happen quite commonly, although they don't always affect land, and even less of them affect land at Category 5, and even less of them affect land at Category 5 further north than the Philippines.
But I wasn't expecting it to regain Cat 5, going
weren't?
by... No. The Joy Typhoon Warning Centre in the previous advisory stated that slight intensification, but the environment's good, which I should bring up the wind shear.
You should. We're waiting. All of us.
Thank you.
If you've just joined us, Maria has ticked under 1,000 miles from Manila. It was 984 at the start of the stream, but don't worry if you're in the Philippines, because it isn't coming, because Maria is instead heading towards Taiwan. Indeed, virtually none of the Philippines will have any chance of seeing tropical storm conditions. However, the southernmost islands of Japan, Miyakojima and Ishigaki Shima, as well as the very northern tip of Taiwan, have an 80% chance or greater of seeing a typhoon, of seeing tropical storm force conditions and probably typhoon conditions. As is the case for China, we expect the landfall zone to be somewhere in between Fusu and Wenzhou, with Shanghai having about a 12% chance. At this time, David's showing us a wind shear map there. Low wind shear on the way.
Yeah, I'll just... Okay, there's the wind shear. And you can clearly see Maria's eye, so wind shear not an issue.
We don't think so, no. Hank pointed out that maybe it's going to be the sea surface temperatures that are a slight issue, maybe from the upwelling from Prapiroon. Not convinced though. We saw those sea surface temperatures before. They looked decent, didn't they?
Yes, upper level divergence has actually increased. I did mention that it had dropped to 30. It's now back up 20 to 40. And the 24-hour shear tendency.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually have it a decrease even to its northwest, even northwest. So wind shear.
I just don't think wind shear is going to be an issue here.
No. And sea surface temperature, well, we know how...
Now, have you got a water vapor chart up there?
Water vapor?
Because that's the other main factor, of course, that could be a killer for the storm.
Just give me a minute, I've just got to...
So we're obviously monitoring a few things whilst we're doing this tonight, and if you've got any questions for us, I will pick them up in a few moments. I'm just got a little bit of workload over here right now. Nelson, any comment for us?
I am looking at a view of the water vapor. It does show that there is some dry air ahead of Maria, but not much, and Maria's quite strong enough to be able to push it out of the way, and it looks like it will shortly break through that dry air.
We've got some news from Beryl, and this is strange. Obviously, they're still doing updates on Beryl. They've placed the centre right over Dominica, and the tropical storm watch they're saying is in effect for Dominica, but they're saying no change, even though their last advisory said it was Martinique that had the watch. So something very strange has just happened there. And we expect, well, there probably won't be an update on Chris, actually, funny enough, because if there's no warnings in effect, then they're not going to do an update now, and they'll wait another 3 hours.
I'm just trying to get a little more information on Chris. I hadn't seen that they had updated, but...
No, as I say, I don't think they will be doing an update on Chris, but that's the news for Beryl. They've put it at 15.5 north, 61.3 west, still with winds of 45 miles per hour, but that it is not a tropical storm. Very confusing over there at the minute, and they're giving it a 30% chance of development. Tropical storm force winds extend outwards up to 45 miles, mainly to the north and northeast. La Desirade Island near Guadalupe recently reported a wind gust of 43 miles per hour.
And Nathan, I'm just reading the Dominican Met Office advisory on Beryl, that rainfall could be between 2 and 4 inches, with higher amounts in elevated areas. A flood warning remains in effect for Dominica up to 12 p.m. Monday. And a high surf advisory, small craft warning are also in effect.
Interesting.
But, and they, as you said, they discontinued the tropical storm warning, but they've still have the watch in
just
place.
Extremely confused, because at the top of this show tonight, it said that the tropical storm watch was in Martinique, and now they've changed it to Dominica. It's very confusing. I don't know. It must have been a typo or a mistake or something. I don't know. But whatever it is, they say that the watch is in Dominica, and we'll change the text on our screen as soon as we can.
The location in Dominica, is that further north or where? Or south?
Dominica is the island immediately north of Martinique.
And what would the distance be? Because I'm just thinking about the
miles.
warning to the watch. So basically, they should have kept with the warning.
Very strange.
And Nathan, just on that point, I've gone back through the National Hurricane Center's archives. At some point, they did update the last bulletin, because what you had said at the top of the show, I did not see, but I accessed the information late.
Well, there we are. Mystery solved. People think we're going nuts out here. Anyway, this is the latest then. The tropical storm watch in effect for Dominica. You're looking at latest water vapor imagery of Typhoon Maria. It's been slowly navigating towards the west-northwest, or maybe slightly northwest in those latest frames. And it's still looking ferocious, powerful, heading towards the southern Japanese islands. And if you have any more questions about that, we'll obviously respond.
And Nathan, just
go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, just responding to what Nelson said about the dry air. I have been keeping an eye on the dry air, and considering how powerful Maria is, she's just going to slam herself through that pocket of dry air.
So, 2 questions. At which peak was Maria stronger? Its peak prior to the IWAR replacement, or the peak it's attaining now? Personally, I would say the first peak. The first peak is the one that I feel has the best argument for 165 miles per hour. I don't think it's really got an argument for that at the minute, looking at it right now. I think its best chance is still the first chance it got, but there's still time to come, isn't there? And Maria could intensify further, who knows? Or it could weaken.
And Nathan, what is the score on the CDPS scale for both Maria and Chris now?
We're going to find out the latest CDPS scores at the top of the hour when they appear on the screen as we do the update. At the top of this hour that we just had, Chris was stage 3, which is, I think, classifies as significant, and Maria was a stage 8. It was stage 9 a few days ago when it was peaking and when it was stalling, rather. But now it is stage 8. Still very intense, very strong, very, dangerous. Well, any thoughts before we finish the hour?
Just repeating that Super Typhoon Maria, currently located 515 nautical miles southeast of Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, tracking west-northwest of 14 knots, and wave height significant is 44 feet. So wave height is actually increasing.
Well, there we go. We'll have more in the next hour. Stay tuned. Here, where have I gone? Where's our video gone? There it is. Wasn't expecting that.
Our live coverage continues in a moment.
You can follow Force 13's outlets, the website, force13.com, our YouTube page, youtube.com/Force13, on Facebook under the same name, Force 13, and our Twitter handle, it's @Force13 if you wish to get in touch. You can also add Force 13 on Skype, and my personal account on Discord, Fool13, at extension 9094.